You would think that a Power Four program like BYU that is won at the level they are winning at would get a national narrative that warmed to them as the CFP grew closer, when in fact reality shows that BYU is getting the opposite treatment.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer at the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider right here on Locked On Cougars. Of course, we're proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now America's #1 sports podcast network. Today's show, we're going to talk about BYU's national narrative and how it continues to actually get downgraded the longer we go into the season, even though, BYU's lost exactly one game. We'll get into that. Then we'll get to Film Review Monday, what I took away from the Cincinnati win for BYU football, and also look back at BYU's win over Wisconsin on Friday afternoon that showed some really positive signs for Kevin Young's squad. We'll get to all that ahead on today's show, and it's all brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your ticketing purchase. All right, so I have been looking at a lot of the storylines around the college football playoff and what to expect when the new rankings come out tomorrow in the aftermath of BYU beating Cincinnati on Saturday night. Did they put astronomical numbers up like a program like Notre Dame did? No, they did not. But Cincinnati is a far, far more capable team right now than the Syracuse Orange are. But that doesn't take away the fact that Notre Dame put a 70 spot on the Syracuse Orange. This is not going to be a BYU versus Notre Dame comparison. Let me be very clear about that right up front. The issue I have is BYU is now a grand total of 21-3 in the past two seasons. And based on what the projections look like, the BYU football program is going to be left out in the cold when the college football playoff comes around if current projections hold true. There are still some moving parts, obviously, that could play into this. But we have a team, speaking of BYU, that's 10-1. And I'm going to quote from an ESPN article projecting the rankings from the College Football Playoff Committee by Heather Dinich. And I will say this, Heather Dinich, in terms of reporters who cover the college football playoff, she maybe have the most access to all the members of the committee because her legitimate job description is to cover the college football playoff. She's talking to people in that room and getting the intel that I feel like nobody else gets. But the problem I have is you read this article about BYU, they say this: BYU's only loss was on the road against number 5 Texas Tech, but it was a poor performance that raised some eyebrows in the committee meeting room, unquote. Okay, so if we're going to go by that logic, if we're going to say that BYU had a bad day against Texas Tech and it's going to be held over their head despite 10 other wins over here, 7 of them against very, very strong opposition, if you want to consider bowl teams as strong opposition. If you're going to say that the one loss, the one maybe off day that BYU's had all season long is going to do in the other 10 wins and counting BYU is piled up at this point, what are we doing here? If you look at the metrics around the teams that are sitting in front of BYU, the one that seemed to have the weakest resume in comparison to BYU was the Oregon Ducks going into this weekend. And finally, in week 13 of the regular season, the Oregon Ducks, wait for it, got a top 25 win. BYU has a top 25 in their back pocket by virtue of their win over Utah. And the best win outside of that win against USC for the Oregon Ducks as compared to BYU is 6-4 Iowa, when BYU has wins over the likes of an 8-3 Cincinnati and 8-3 Arizona on down the list. Is it 7-4 Cincinnati? Point remains. BYU's wins stack up with anybody out there, but it goes, I think, directly to the inherent bias that exists in the college football playoff as we have it right now. We have people out there on this committee who believe that strength of record is supposed to matter. Okay, if strength of record is supposed to matter, BYU's got a better strength of record than almost anybody in the 5 slots ahead of them. They have strength of record going into this past weekend was number 6 in the country. We need to value wins. We need to value success on the field. We do not need to downgrade because the committee right now apparently is fascinated with your losses, but only in certain circumstances. Alabama, who is projected to sit right in front of BYU, has a loss to a middling 5-5 Florida State team. So you're going to tell me that BYU had an off day against Texas Tech, got beat on the road by a team you, by your own admission, is one of the elite teams in college football in the Texas Tech Red Raiders. But that loss to BYU raised eyebrows in the committee room, but a loss for Alabama to Florida State doesn't raise eyebrows in the committee room. That screams to me that when you lose matters. And yet again, the SEC gets the benefit of the doubt while the Big 12 does not get any such luck. I would like to think that level heads will prevail in that college football playoff committee room. And BYU, if they take care of business down the stretch here, that includes beating UCF and putting on a far, far better performance against Texas Tech, if not outright winning the Big 12 title. Because if they do that, there's nothing the committee can do. Hands are tied. BYU's in the playoff field. So that may be what they have to do to break down the door. But I would like to think that if BYU puts on strong performances against UCF, and then even if they lose to Texas Tech in the Big 12 title game, I would like to believe that an 11-2 BYU squad is worthy of the college football playoff when you have programs out there like in Alabama who might be sitting at 10-2 and have no path to playing in the big SEC title game. Maybe this is just me stumping hard for BYU because I believe that they deserve a shot, because they absolutely do. Does BYU play a brand of football that is eye-popping with all kinds of magic numbers? No, they don't. But they are a relentless, physical, dominant football team who, if this program, I'm telling you right now, if BYU existed in the SEC, we'd have people fawning over them about how physical they play and how they just steamroll opponents. Think of the Nick Saban Alabama squads. That's more in the vein of what BYU has kind of transformed themselves into. Remember the Mark Ingram era of Alabama when they just absolutely steamrolled opponents? Rarely was it sexy. Rarely was it absolutely prolific offensively. But you know what it was? It was darn effective. And that's what BYU has proven. They are a darn effective football team, and that's not good enough. I don't know what it is. And it may scream yet again that the inequity in college football reigns supreme. And that's disappointing. It is disappointing. And if this BYU team is relegated to playing maybe in the Alamo Bowl or the Pop-Tarts Bowl after putting together an 11-2 campaign, and you'd go back over, let's say 11-2 by virtue of a loss to Texas Tech in the Big 12 title game. You're looking at a team at that point who would have gone 22-4 over the past 2 seasons and has played in what are considered to be minor bowl games. It's not right. Doesn't sit right and doesn't feel good to anybody, I think, in and around BYU. And I would like to think that Brett Yormark, et cetera, will speak out more vociferously in defense of BYU, because the statement last Tuesday about him wanting to earn it on the field didn't sit right with me, because I'll reiterate here what I've reiterated on the postcast on late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. You can't earn it on the field if you can't get on the field to begin with, speaking of the playoff. We need some people out there who have got pull, people like Brett Yormark, to put some pressure on this playoff committee to make it right, because it's not right now for BYU. All right, what did I learn from BYU's win over Cincinnati? Well, I kind of lifted the lid a little bit, saying that this is a team that's more in the mold of an Alabama of yesteryear, but they showed some really, really nice things. And one person in particular just absolutely flashed, I think, everything he's got in terms of his potential. That's LJ Martin. We'll get to our film review Monday, looking back at Cincinnati, coming up next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Wayfair. Now, the holiday season is coming, my friends. That's time to get your home ready for that. Whether you need seating for guests, cozy new linens, or fun serveware for holiday hosting, Wayfair's Black Friday sale is here to help you make your space shine. And the best part, you don't have to wait. Wayfair's Black Friday deals are happening all month long with up to 70% off from everything from sofas all the way down to spatulas. The best part is, if you want to upgrade, no matter what it is in your home, if you wanted to host family for the holidays, you ever had that opportunity, and you want to make sure it looks absolutely perfect, you know how much a difference a few touches can make. That's why Wayfair is here to make it as easy as they possibly can make it. Don't miss out on the early Black Friday deals. Head to wayfair.com now to shop for Wayfair's Black Friday sale, consisting of up to 70% off, like I said, everything on their website. That's WAYFAIR.com, and the sale ends on December 7th. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing fantastic out there. And thank you once again for making the Locked On Podcast Network America's #1 sports podcast network. All right, excuse the voice. I have the curse in terms of being a broadcaster that when I catch the feeling like anything out there in terms of sickness, it settles right into like my lungs and it affects my vocal cord. So apologies for if my voice sounds off today, but I do want to give a shout out to Quinn, who I met Friday night. I took my kids. We were getting pizza at a local establishment here in Saratoga Springs, Utah, and turned around and Quinn said, "Hey, you're the guy from Locked On Cougars. I appreciate it." I said, "Go Cougs." I said, "Quinn, good to meet you, man." So Quinn, your public shout out for saying hi and appreciate all the support of this venture. All right. So looking back at the win for BYU over Cincinnati, it kind of just begins and ends with LJ Martin. One thing that Austin Collie said after BYU's win, and I think it holds true, is that I think he about redlined LJ Martin in that game. Now, I know after the game he said he felt like he could go play another game. You know what? 32 carries and I think it was 4 receptions, 36 touches in a college football game. That's enough. And I think the BYU understood that he was just rocking and rolling and said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to feed the hot hand." It's exactly what Kalani Sitake said post-game. And rewatching this game, LJ was at the peak of his powers. Guys like Todd McShay said that they believe that LJ Martin is a top 5 running back in this draft class. Some pretty high praise, and he'll have a decision to make after the season. There's no doubt about that. He has battled through a pretty insignificant injury to that shoulder. Any of you who saw him pull up in that Iowa State game, and the fact that he's bounced back to the level he's bounced back to, that's pretty impressive considering what he did with less than 100% shoulder on Saturday night, 222 yards, 7th all-time in program history. It's elite stuff we saw from him, and he was dishing out punishment. He gave as many licks in that game as it felt like he took. And I'm telling you, the Cincinnati Bearcats, their defenders are still going to be feeling LJ Martin for some time to come. He really, really put it out there. I have to say LJ Martin shined, but I also got to say BYU's offensive line, downright elite, it felt like, for the most part on Saturday night. I was really impressed with guys like Kyle Safarchuk. I thought Austin Leusa did some good things. Sonny Makassini stepping in for Waylon Lapuaha. It was a bit of a rotation there at the guard spots, but all of them, they absolutely brought it. And Bruce Mitchell, by the way, I don't think we're appreciating Bruce Mitchell's story enough. This is a guy that just under 2 seasons ago was a defensive lineman who seemed destined to be a backup for his entire career. And now he's emerged as one of the best, if not the best center in the Big 12, if you go by most of the PFF metrics, etc. Really impressive stuff from BYU's offensive line. They really paved the way for LJ Martin, but LJ at the same time, his vision and his ability to kind of cut back when needed and see holes and bounce to those holes, really, really elite stuff. We saw BYU's rushing game back to kind of what it was early this season. Remember, at one point, BYU's rushing attack was 10th in the country. I know it was up inside the top 10 very early on this season. They got back to that in a big way against Cincinnati. And I got to say, that final drive when BYU put their 4-minute offense on the field and had every intention of just grinding out the clock. And some people were, Kalani Sitake kind of tells me, I wish LJ would have gone down so he could just kill the clock outright. But that 4-minute drive was about pure physical domination. It brought the quote from Russ Grimm, Pro Football Hall of Famer, to mind that there is no greater feeling in life than moving a man from point A to point B against his will, unquote. That is one of my favorite quotes, and it was quoted to me when I was a high school offensive lineman, and it holds true. BYU's ability to just take players and guys like Dante Corleone, who are going to be really, really productive NFL players, it feels like, and move them wherever they wanted to, it felt like, in critical circumstances. LJ Martin just carving up this Cincinnati defense, that was dominant. And I think that if anybody who watched that game saw how dominant BYU was in that contest, because they really did just tell Cincinnati, hey, we're going to run it down your throat time and time again. We have this guy named Bear Bachmeyer, and this guy named LJ Martin. And what they're going to do is they're going to run for 6-7 yards a pop, and you're not going to be able to do a darn thing about it. Really, really impressive what I saw on film from them. Other things I saw from this game. We need to see more from BYU's wide receivers not named Parker Kingston and Chase Roberts. Chase Roberts removed himself from the game, and I think him being able to get off the field by trotting off the field, you hope it's a slight hamstring injury where it's not going to miss a ton of time, but Hamstrings are uber tricky. Any of you who have had a hamstring injury at any point in your life know how touchy that muscle is. And I'm hopeful that him removing himself from the game was a precautionary measure. I truly hope that is the case. We'll see what happens as the week progresses in terms of talking to coaches and ultimately seeing the player availability reports that come out Wednesday through Friday. So keep an eye on that. But we need to see more from the wide receivers not named him or Parker Kingston. When Chase went out, it felt like if Parker Kingston wasn't the guy who was getting the ball, who else is making themselves available to a guy like Bear Bachmeyer? I know that Jojo Phillips had the one reception that ultimately was overturned on review that got them the first down, but there's too far and few between plays from BYU's wide receivers not named, like I said, Parker and Chase. You need Jojo to step up. You need Tiger Bachmeyer. You need Reggie Frischnecht, who's now getting some time on the field. You need all those guys to show more on the field. You need to see more from Cody Hagan. I really do want to see more from these players and step up and make the wide receiver and give the reps that you're getting on the field right now count. It really is something they need to improve upon. Keanu Tanavasa. Really, really impressed with him in this game. Followed up a very, very strong, if not downright dominant performance against TCU with another strong performance against Cincinnati. John Talmoyapeo and Nisi Purcell, they also really flashed. I felt like BYU's defensive line right now, early on in the season, BYU's defensive line was struggling to hold up, and BYU's linebacking core headed by Jack Kelly, Isaiah Glasker, Siale Sarah, etc., really kind of stepped in and made up the difference for them early on the season. Now the tables are turning a bit. BYU's defensive line is bailing out some of BYU's linebackers, and it's good to see that. You want to see BYU's defensive line eat up those blockers and allow BYU's linebackers to have a little more free reign. I still feel like Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker might be just a touch slow due to the injuries, the nagging injuries they dealt with all season long. And I thought Siale Sarah, he was BYU's best linebacker on the field for my money. I was really impressed. He got in gaps. He shot the gaps. He really made impressive tackles. He took a bad angle once or twice, but that happens. I really thought the BYU's defensive line, though, they owned the trench warfare against Cincinnati. And if Brendan Sorsby couldn't fling the ball down the field, really, what else offense did they have? They generated somewhere in the 80-yard category in terms of rushing yards. And this is a program, speaking of Cincinnati, that likes to run the football if afforded the opportunity. So I was really impressed that BYU's defensive line held up. Kevin Young uses the term, we'll get to basketball here in a minute, stacking days. And I felt like the defensive line stacked another good game on top of a good game previously against TCU. And that's a good thing to see, is that BYU's defensive line is rounding into form right as you really need them going into postseason play. That's a nice thing to see from BYU. Other things I saw from this. If there's one criticism I've got of Bear Bachmeyer's game right now, it's that his processing, especially in raucous road environments like we saw at Texas Tech and in this case Cincinnati, it can be just a little bit too slow, and it leads to opportunities for him to get intercepted. Remember the interception that Tiger Bachmeyer ripped out of the defender's hand that was thrown right to him. He's a touch slow on getting the ball out of his hands to guys like that. The 2-point conversion is another example of that. Late in this game, BYU decides to go for 2 to try to get up 2 scores. And Parker Kingston immediately off the snap beats his guy and flashes his hands like, get me the ball now. Bear's got to be able to zing that ball in there right then. He takes another tick, doesn't make the throw on time, and the cornerback is able to recover, undercut it, and intercept it. That is a play that I'm sure that Matt Mitchell and Aaron Roderick are going to show in film review to him and say, see, Parker, he beat his guy. That ball's got to be out in his hands the second he flashes open on that. And that's a processing thing. Bear will get better with that. It's one of the kind of the freshman things that pops up from time to time in his game. He's absolutely remarkable in so many different ways. If there's one criticism, it's that. And I do think given time, more film review, and as he gets older and more established as a college quarterback, he's going to be even better about circumstances like that, and you won't see him miss those throws. So really do think it was a solid workmanlike effort from BYU, downright dominant in the run game. And it was fun to watch BYU just assert their will against Cincinnati. It was really, really impressive to see what they were able to do in that circumstance. One other thing is they ran the tornado reverse, and it got absolutely blown up by Cincinnati in that circumstance. I think that the new thing that BYU probably needs to add to that play, because Cody Hagan is kind of the designated guy to run the ball on that. If it gets blown up in that circumstance, Cody has the ability, because it's not been there's no forward pass in that, it's a reverse. He can just fling the ball out of bounds beyond the line of scrimmage, and it's no harm, no foul. That'll be something I'm sure will be talked about with him, to have the heads up. And hey, if it gets blown up, you have no ability to get upfield and gain yardage. Just throw the ball out of bounds. And it's got to be beyond the line of scrimmage. Let's be very clear about that. But that could have saved you some yardage on that in that circumstance. But really, really overall impressive stuff from BYU. I saw from film review on that. All right, coming up next though, BYU basketball absolutely dominated a top 25 opponent in Wisconsin on Friday afternoon. Rewatching that game, much like BYU football, pretty darn fun to watch. It helps when BYU wins, obviously, but the way that they did it, we'll get into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. College football is ongoing. There's no better place to be than our favorite teams, watching them out on the gridiron, the tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands. There's literally nothing like it. Let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. And that's why I want you to do what I do and use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You pull up the Game Time app. You can see exactly what your seat view is going to be inside the app right there. They have zone deals where you essentially pick the seats. You save big because you don't really necessarily care where you sit in that section. They'll pick the seats and help you save money along the way. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way that I have bought tickets, and I want you guys to do the same thing. Take guys, we're going to buying your tickets and do it with our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, it's the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College, for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, please consider signing up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group or gifting it to somebody this holiday season. If they want the inside scoop on all things BYU sports, I've got it for you. Everything, at least I've got. I don't proclaim to maybe be the insider for BYU, but I've got a lot of insider tidbits that go to our insider group. And if you want those inside tidbits, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's $5 a month to be in the group, and you also get a 14-day free trial before you're charged a single penny. Link is in the show notes below if you're watching and or listening to this, or reach out to us, and we'll get you squared away with the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, so looking back at the BYU basketball game, I have a tweet that some people have been kind of quoting and using all weekend long that, remember, early on in the second half of that game against Wisconsin, A.J. DeBonsa gets whistled for his fourth foul. And I tweeted, BYU's in trouble, essentially, because let's be honest, A.J. DeBonsa has kind of been the linchpin for everything BYU's tried to do this basketball season so far. And when he went to the bench early on in that second half, the game was still very much in a circumstance that if Wisconsin got rolling a little bit, they could have taken control of that game. Well, the most impressive thing rewatching this game for BYU is that in that circumstance, he goes to the bench for about roughly 10 minutes, give or take 30 seconds, it felt like. BYU actually extended lead by more than 7 points, and they did it with a contribution from across the roster. That's the biggest thing I took away from rewatching BYU's win over Wisconsin, was that we finally saw the depth of BYU's roster kind of bring to bear what it's capable of. I have thought, and I still continue to think, that BYU will kind of live and die in many circumstances with the big three, speaking of DeBonsa, Rob Wright, and Richie Saunders. And by the way, the other two, Rob Wright and Richie Saunders, downright prolific. Richie led BYU with 26 points, absolutely showed his takeover ability in that circumstance. We had Rob Wright get a near triple-double once again. And I thought that other contributors on the roster made up the difference for what AJ lacked in that circumstance, not being on the court. Tyler Miras, Dominic Diomande, who else? Hadim Boop. All of them gave BYU something in that circumstance. And the nice part was they all kind of played roughly 15 to 20 minutes each and showed that they are very viable options to play games. I appreciate Tyler Miras starting to knock down some threes, and that's what he was brought in for BYU, to come in and be a dead-eye shooter. And we started to see that a little bit against Wisconsin. BYU also, I didn't notice it for whatever reason, and rewatching it made it more glaringly obvious that BYU is being much better and much more judicious with the ball this year. Remember, last year, turnover woes were an issue most of the season, it felt like, for BYU. Sometimes they had 10 or so turnovers. It felt like in the first 10 minutes of games at points last year. They really didn't value the ball. But this year, BYU, this game against Wisconsin, just 8 turnovers for the game. Really impressive stuff. And that's kind of been a theme looking back at box scores because I wanted to consult and see what it looked like. BYU's been very good about taking care of the ball so far this season. And so long as they continue to value possessions and value the ball, that's going to help them win basketball games, especially when they're much closer than they were against this Wisconsin team. The other thing is, how impressive was it that BYU wasn't the least athletic team on the court? How many times have you been able to say that in the past, I don't know, 100 years of BYU basketball? It was downright obvious that BYU was the more athletic team, the faster team. They pushed the pace. They were high flying. They may not have had the size because Wisconsin's got 2 legit 7-footers they can throw out on the court. BYU doesn't have that. Just they have Xavier Staten, but he's a reserve role right now for BYU. But BYU's athleticism more than made up for the towering height that Wisconsin had. BYU has plenty of length on the wings. Guys like AJ DeBonsa, he is 6'9", and if you believe the measurements, he's apparently got a 7'2" wingspan. So they've got the length, athleticism. Like, this is a different looking BYU squad than I have ever seen in my entire life. And I'm sure many of you who are older than I am can add that it's much more different than any other team maybe you've seen in your lifetime as well. It was cool to see BYU be a more athletic team on tape. It really was fun to watch them go out there and be able to essentially do whatever they wanted to do physically in this game. I have not been able to say that very often about BYU. And the win for BYU came with their ability to really shoot threes and make them at a high level once again. I talked about it going into this game, is that I wondered if BYU is ever going to get back to being a prolific three-point shooting team. And numbers still are vary on BYU in terms of what they may end up being as a three-point shooting team, but they showed the ability to come into this game and make those threes. And they ended up shooting 41% from three, 14 of 34. So that avalanche came late in this game because it wasn't that high earlier on in the game, but it's nice to see when BYU needs to turn it on to bury opponents like a Wisconsin, who, might I reiterate, the number 23 team in the country. This is no Wisconsin Whitewater or any other directional school in Wisconsin. No, this is the University of Wisconsin, the Badgers, the Big Ten. Like, this is a really, really darn good basketball team that BYU got everything from them in March Madness just 7 months ago. It was really impressive to watch BYU do what they did in this game. And I also need to talk about AJ. When he finally came back into the game, you could tell he's like, all right, this thing's over. Like, he was not going to let anything stop him from being impactful in the time he had remaining on the court. And he essentially came in and said, okay, enough of this playing around, enough of this. BYU to obviously reestablish their lead. But essentially, if you want to talk about the final dagger that made sure that there was zero chance of Wisconsin coming back in this game, AJ DeBonsa spearheaded that. And it was really, really cool to see that this BYU team can come at you in waves. It's one thing we saw from the team a season ago is they played 11 and 12 men deep. They may not have that deep of a bench right now, but they've got 8, 9 guys right now who showed, at least against Wisconsin, they're very capable of contributing. And that's got to make Kevin Young feel a lot more confident about his roster composition going into the season. Yeah, it was obviously, it hurt to lose some of the guys that they have lost this season. And it was good to see, by the way, Keba Keita back on the court in very quick succession after that hit he took against UConn in Boston. But the depth of BYU's roster, the athleticism, the length, it's showing itself to be a very valuable asset that BYU has in their back pocket. And it's going to serve them well as they continue on through their games. Coming up this week, they're going to be down in Orlando for that MTE event, and it's a big opportunity. They're going to play the likes of Miami, a chance to play Dayton, etc. So maybe not the top-tier opponents that BYU will play in the non-conference or in the Big 12, but yet more name opponents. If you are a college basketball junkie, you know the names of the teams BYU's playing. So they play Miami on Thursday afternoon. Let me get that time for you. 3 o'clock Mountain Time, so 5 o'clock Eastern. And then the following day, they'll play the winner of either Dayton or Georgetown. So some opportunities for BYU in this Terry's Chocolate ESPN Events Invitational down there in Kissimmee, Florida. And we'll see how it all shakes out on this weekend. We'll have more for you guys as that gets a little bit closer. All right. Thank you for bearing with my voice. Thank you for being here every single day. Thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast. Absolutely a privilege to do what I do, to talk to you guys every day about BYU. And fingers crossed, the College Football Playoff Committee wakes up and says, hey, you know that BYU team? They're pretty darn good, but I'm also not holding my breath on that. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Also, we need to talk about something that's developing in the Big 12. Texas Tech and the College Sports Commission are at odds. Is it something BYU needs to look at a little bit closer in terms of what the CSC is hoping to do? I'm going to get into that tomorrow as well, so stay tuned for that. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen. Our friends over at Locked On Big 12 Podcast. That's our good friend Drake Toll, who has been absolutely speaking out in favor of BYU in so many different circumstances. Make sure you make that your second listen of the day. And as always, come back tomorrow and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.